I'm 73 years old, and I just finished analyzing 30 years of my social life. Out of every 100 interactions I had with people I called friends, 89 of them were complete wastes of time. My name is Vincent. I'm 73, and for the last 3 decades, I've been keeping detailed records of my friendships, who I spent time with, what we did, how I felt afterward, whether those relationships actually added value to my life or just filled time. And after analyzing all of this data, I discovered something that changed how I see friendship completely. Most of what we call friendship is just social obligation disguised as connection. And I wasted thousands of hours on people who meant nothing to me while neglecting the few who actually mattered. I need to tell you about this because I see people making the same mistake I made, spreading themselves thin across dozens of shallow relationships, feeling obligated to maintain friendships that drain them, confusing being busy socially with actually having meaningful connections. And they're going to wake up one day like I did and realize they spent decades on people who wouldn't even notice if they disappeared. Let me explain how I got here. I've always been what people call a social person. Lots of friends. Always had plans. Always going to gatherings and events. People would say I was popular, that I had great social skills, that I was lucky to have so many friends. But about 30 years ago, when I was 43, something happened that made me start questioning this. I had what I thought was a health crisis. Turned out to be nothing serious, just a scare. But for about 2 weeks, I thought I might have something really bad. And during those 2 weeks, I noticed something disturbing. Out of the dozens of people I considered friends, only 3 actually showed up. Only 3 people checked on me regularly, offered real help, acted like they genuinely cared, whether I lived or died. Everyone else sent a quick text or made a brief phone call and then went back to their lives. And I started thinking about all the time I'd invested in these friendships, all the birthday parties I'd attended, all the dinners and happy hours and weekend plans, all the emotional energy I'd put into maintaining these relationships. And when I actually needed something, 90% of these people were nowhere to be found. That's when I started keeping records. I'm an accountant by training, so tracking things comes naturally to me. I started writing down every social interaction, who initiated it, how long it lasted, what we did, how I felt during and after, whether the interaction added value to my life or just filled time. I created categories: meaningful conversations, shallow small talk, fun experiences, obligatory attendance, energy giving, energy draining, and I tracked all of it for 30 years. At first, I thought maybe I was being too analytical, that you can't quantify friendship, that some things are meant to be felt, not measured. But the more I tracked, the more patterns emerged, and those patterns were impossible to ignore. I had a group of guys I played poker with every month, had been doing it for years. I counted it as friendship, but when I actually analyzed those interactions, they were completely surface level. We'd play cards, talk about sports and work, have some drinks, go home, never talked about anything real, never supported each other through difficulties, never had conversations that mattered. One of those guys went through a divorce. None of us knew until months after it happened, because we never talked about real things. We just showed up, played cards, made jokes, left. That's not friendship. That's just a regular scheduled activity with the same people. I had another group from work. We'd go to happy hour every Friday. I thought these were friends, but analyzing the interaction showed they were just co-workers killing time. The conversations were gossip and complaints. The connection was circumstantial. When I eventually left that job, I never heard from any of them again. I had neighbors I'd have dinner with occasionally, church people I'd see at events, extended family I'd spend holidays with, and I counted all of these as friendships, as social connections that enriched my life. But when I really looked at the data, most of these interactions were obligations, things I did because I felt I should, not because I wanted to. And they left me feeling drained, not fulfilled. I'd come home from these events exhausted, would tell my wife Martha I needed to decompress, would feel relieved when plans got cancelled. But I kept accepting invitations and maintaining these relationships because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to have a busy social life, be well connected, have lots of friends. But why? What was I actually getting from all of this? The three people who showed up during my health scare were my actual friends. My friend Thomas, who I'd known since college. My cousin Rachel, who I'd always been close to. And my neighbor Daniel, who I'd developed a real connection with over years of actual conversations. These three people I could talk to about real things, could be vulnerable with, could count on when things got hard. The time I spent with them left me feeling energized and understood. These relationships added genuine value to my life. Everyone else was just noise, social noise that filled my calendar but emptied my energy. After tracking for about 5 years, I had enough data to see clear patterns. About 11% of my social interactions were with these three people and a few others who fell into the same category of genuine friends. Those interactions were meaningful, energizing, valuable. The other 89% were with people I called friends, but who were really just acquaintances, social obligations, people I spent time with out of habit or expectation, not because the relationship actually mattered. And I was spending way more time on the 89% than on the 11%, because there were more of them, because they were more demanding, because saying no to shallow friendships felt rude, while neglecting deep friendships felt acceptable, because those people would understand. I was prioritizing quantity over quality, spreading myself thin across dozens of meaningless relationships while neglecting the few that actually mattered. So I started making changes, started saying no to the 89%, stopped going to poker night, stopped attending events I didn't want to attend, stopped maintaining relationships that drained me, and people were offended. The poker guys wanted to know why I wasn't coming anymore. Co-workers asked why I wasn't going to happy hour. Neighbors wondered why I was declining dinner invitations. I tried explaining that I was simplifying my social life, focusing on deeper relationships, that nothing personal, but I needed to prioritize my time and energy differently. Most people didn't understand. Some people got angry, accused me of being antisocial or thinking I was too good for them. But here's what happened. My life got better, significantly better. I had more time for Thomas and Rachel and Daniel, more energy for Martha, more space for myself. I stopped feeling socially exhausted all the time, and my relationships with those few real friends deepened because I wasn't spreading myself thin anymore. I could actually be present, could invest real time and energy, could show up for them the way they showed up for me. Thomas went through a rough period in his 60s. His wife died. He was devastated, and I was there for him, really there. Not just sending texts and making brief calls. I spent time with him, listened to him, helped him through it, because I had the emotional bandwidth to do that because I wasn't exhausted from maintaining 50 shallow friendships. Rachel's son had addiction problems. She needed support. I was there consistently for months because she mattered, because our relationship was real, because that's what actual friendship looks like. Daniel and I started taking trips together, just the two of us, or sometimes with our wives. Real trips where we talk about life and death and meaning and regrets. Deep conversations that you can only have with people you really trust. These relationships became the center of my social life, and everything else fell away. And I don't miss any of it. I kept tracking for 30 years. And the numbers stayed consistent. Roughly 89% of social interactions were useless. About 11% were valuable. And I learned to identify which was which much faster. I learned to recognize energy-draining relationships. People who only called when they needed something. People who dominated conversations. People who made everything about themselves. People who never asked how I was doing. People who showed up for good times but disappeared during hard times. And I learned to recognize energy-giving relationships. People who listened as much as they talked. People who remembered details about my life. People who showed up when things were hard. People who made me feel seen and valued. People whose company left me feeling better than I felt before. Most people spend their whole lives maintaining the 89%, feeling obligated to people who don't actually care about them, exhausting themselves on shallow relationships while wondering why they feel lonely despite having so many friends. Because having 50 shallow friendships is lonelier than having 3 deep ones. Because being surrounded by people who don't really know you is more isolating than being alone. I'm 73 now. I have 5 people I consider real friends. 5 people I invest my time and energy in. 5 people who would show up if I needed them. 5 people I would show up for without question. Everyone else is gone, and I don't miss them. Don't think about them. Don't regret letting those relationships fade, because those relationships were never real to begin with. They were just social. Obligations I mistook for friendship. Time fillers I confused with connection. Surface-level interactions I thought meant something, because I didn't know what real friendship actually looked like. Real friendship is rare, much rarer than we want to admit. Most people you meet will be acquaintances at best. People you know but don't really connect with. People you spend time with but don't actually care about beyond the surface level. And that's okay. You don't need dozens of friends. You need a few real ones. People who know you, who value you, who show up, who make your life genuinely better by being in it. I see people in their 40s and 50s maintaining friendships from high school and college that stopped being real decades ago. Staying in touch out of obligation or nostalgia, going to reunions and group chats and feeling exhausted by all of it. And I want to tell them they can let it go. They don't owe these people their time and energy. Just because you were friends 30 years ago doesn't mean you have to stay friends now. People change. Lives diverge. And most of those old friendships are just ghosts you're keeping on life support. I see younger people spreading themselves thin across social media, trying to maintain hundreds of connections, feeling pressure to respond to everyone, to keep up with everyone's lives, to be present for everyone. And they're exhausting themselves maintaining relationships that don't matter while neglecting the few that do. The 89% will always be there, always demanding your attention, always expecting your time, always making you feel guilty for prioritizing yourself or your real friends over them. But you don't owe them anything. Your time and energy are limited. You only have so much to give. And every hour you spend on useless relationships is an hour you're not spending on meaningful ones. Every interaction that drains you is energy you can't give to the people who actually matter. After 30 years of data, here's what I know. Most friendships aren't worth maintaining. Most social obligations aren't worth fulfilling. Most people in your life could disappear tomorrow and your life would be better, not worse. That sounds harsh, but it's true. And pretending otherwise is why so many people feel lonely despite being constantly surrounded by people. Why so many people feel exhausted despite having such active social lives. Why so many people wonder why friendship feels so unsatisfying. Because most of what we call friendship isn't. It's just social performance, mutual obligation, habitual interaction with no real substance. Real friendship is knowing someone deeply, being known deeply in return, having conversations that matter, showing up when it's hard, being there consistently, adding value to each other's lives, making each other better, creating memories that mean something. That's rare, and it should be, because that level of connection takes time and energy, and you can only maintain that with a few people. If you're trying to maintain it with dozens of people, you're not actually doing it with any of them. I'm 73, and I spent 30 years tracking my friendships, and the data doesn't lie. 89% were useless, and letting go of that 89% was the best decision I ever made. Subscribe if you're ready to stop wasting time on people who don't matter.